there's that spark of hope in each dystopian story, no matter how dark it is. Maybe it's a character, maybe it's, hope at the bottom of the box in Pandora's box. Maybe it's a moment of change for the character. Maybe it's overcoming the enemy. But there is that hope that change is possible. And I think that's what we have to push forward.
Hello. Welcome to Most Writers Are Fans, the podcast that helps you on your writer journey. So this episode is going to be the last classic episode of this era, and we're going to be moving into the new era next. So get ready. I have a lot of really exciting episodes coming up that's going to be specifically about helping you with problems that you need to sort of like become a writer or be a better writer. Or just sort of like learn how to navigate the industry. There's so many things to learn, and I've been learning them as I go, and I'm excited that you will get to learn them with me, with my guests. But in the meantime, in today's episode, we're going to be talking to Michael Solís. He is a speculative fiction author and creative nonfiction. He wrote the novel Deficient, and I met him at LavenderCon, another one of my LavenderCon guests, and he's really great. I really enjoyed talking to him. He's a fun guy. And he has so many great thoughts. It was just nice to chat to somebody that thinks about things deeply. So the audio for the intro they recorded for this actually got lost, but I think that might be appropriate because this is the last, like I said, this is the last of these episodes. So the main thing that I'm going to be losing moving forward is the intros where I kind of like say what's on my mind and what's going on, because I want to just kind of like get right into the interview after this. So this is going to be like the last one of these. So it's kind of bittersweet. I'm going to be doing like updates randomly on the feed that are sort of like just this, but this is going to be the last one where I just kind of like riff on like where I'm at and what's going on. So I thought that I would maybe do something a little atypical for me and go a little bit with what's happening in the news right now. So I'm sure you guys have heard about the recent assassination and how everybody's been feeling about it. And I just want to kind of like go through the journey that I went on whenever I first kind of like discovered the news. And I think the thing that has really stuck with me is like how normalized gun violence has become in this country and how it can kind of like enter your life when you're doing anything. And that's just, it's sort of wild. I was going to write the other day. So I don't get out a ton. It's just hard to get out. So I was going to like recycle some cans because we have to drive pretty far to recycle cans where I live in a rural area. And I stopped to eat dinner. And as I was eating dinner, the Fox News screen was across from me and I saw what happened. Like I saw that this person had died. And then I went on to write. I went to this coffee shop to write. I often will write in coffee shops just to get out of my normal environment. And I really couldn't do it. Like it was just my head space wasn't there. It was just really, I was sort of like a weird mix of like scared, but also angry, kind of sad, but also like conflicted, right? Because this person wasn't a great person for queer people like me. It was just, he didn't say very many nice things about people like us. So it was hard to kind of like feel bad about it. But at the same time, he was a human person. And I feel bad whenever something happens to any human person. I remember whenever Osama bin Laden was killed, I saw the update on my phone or whatever. And I was like torn about that because I was like, it just feels weird celebrating the death of a person, any person. So like that is maybe I may be like too empathetic for this world, but that's fine. But so that's sort of like where I was at. Is I was like, this is such a weird combination of feelings. Like I don't know how to process this, and so I did what I often do when I need to learn how to process stuff, and I wrote. So like I said, I couldn't write the stuff I wanted to write, which is frustrating because I'm editing my novel that comes out in August of next year, and I have one chapter left. I have to sort of like consolidate two chapters and add a little bit to the middle. And I couldn't do it. It was like this is the last thing to do. Once I get this part done, the novel can go back to the editor and kind of get its last round of edits. So it was frustrating that I didn't get to do that. But I think it was good because I was able to write just kind of like op-ed, but it was kind of like a blog post that I'm never gonna do anything with, because I just wanted to get all my feelings out, and it did feel good to do that. So I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're probably also a writer of some kind. So I would encourage you that if you're having sort of those complicated feelings, because like it lasted the whole day, and let's face it, we live in America. There's not a terrible chance that you may have these feelings pretty soon because of some other thing that happened. So don't be afraid to just kind of like, because I do think that this is something that, as authors who are like either already doing the thing or are like about to make the jump into doing the thing, I think that often you feel like if you write something, it has to be for somebody, like it has to be like for a project or for an audience. But I think that we can't forget that it is good for us to just write for us. You know, like not everything I write has to be published. And I think that that's something that's important to remember because, like I do have a journal that I will sometimes write little notes in, but every now and again, like if I don't have the journal with me, or I want to do something with it, like I just need to write. And so that's what I did. Um, so, I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I think that it's something that I didn't not want to address because it did like impact my life. Like I did think about this like way too much that day. And then like going into the next day as a high school English teacher, like I was really concerned about like how a lot of the young men may have been taking it. And turns out I was like way, way, way overthinking it. But there was like some people that were upset about it. And it was just something that sort of like consumed me for a long time. And it did feel sort of good to be able to just let all that stuff out. So I hope that wherever you are, you're sort of like doing okay because God knows it's rough out there and it's not getting easier. So I hope that you're doing well. And know that writing is an outlet you have, and it doesn't have to be for anything or anybody. It's okay if it's just for you. And also like the other thing that has been like wildly helpful for me, and I say this on the podcast all the time, but I feel like it's worth repeating. It is so helpful to have a community, to have people that you can like confide in that understand what you're going through. Because whenever you're an indie author, especially as a self-published author, the work that we do is something that you can't describe. You literally can't describe the sheer scope of work that you do as a self-published author. And so like having people that you can talk to about that stuff is like it's indescribable how important that is. So like also lean on your community. Whatever your community is, lean on it. If you don't have an author community, find one. Shoot me a message on Instagram. I'd be happy to talk to anybody that is looking how to sort of like make connections in the industry. I'd love to introduce you to people and maybe we're good connections, if that's what something you'd be interested in. Um, so, don't be afraid to shoot a message. I guess that's the other thing. Don't be afraid to talk to people. I think that's the other thing is like every author that I've ever talked to, and I've talked to authors sort of across the spectrum, whether they're like barely even, maybe not even considered publishing, all the way up to like, has been traditionally published multiple times as a best-selling author. All of them have been so wildly approachable. So keep that in mind too. Authors are like a pretty affable bunch, and we don't have to overthink this. All right, so that's it for the intro. I'm gonna go for now, but I'll be right back with my guest, Michael Solís. Welcome back to Those Writers and Fans. I'm joined now with Michael Solís, a young adult sci-fi writer. Say hello, Michael. How are you doing?
Hi, everyone. Michael here. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Terry.
Yeah, so I love to tell our guests where I met people. Michael and I also met at LavenderCon. I think that I saw your panel before I met you. So I got a good sense of like who you were ahead of time, which is always a fun thing at cons where you can kind of like get to know somebody before you actually talk to them. And then we chatted briefly on the vendor floor, and then but I felt like you were a very dynamic person just in the brief meeting that we had. So I'm kind of excited to get into this.
Yeah, and I think you were one of the first people I met. You were super friendly, and I think you even mentioned the podcast back then. LavenderCon was awesome. It was a great event surrounded by wonderful queer creators and fans of the work. I think I did a panel discussion on I think, young adult literature, but then I think I was asked to host a panel on queer sci-fi.
That's what I watched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was fun. Like I think we had less than 24 hours notice to prepare the queer sci-fi panel. I felt terrible because I couldn't read any of the other authors' books ahead of time. But it was a ton of fun. It was an amazing event.
Yeah, and I can tell you, as somebody who does a lot of these podcasts, usually it's kind of fun to just kind of like learn, get to know an author, and then maybe visit their books later, because like I think it's an interesting opportunity to kind of like get a sense of who they are, and then when you do read their books, you're like, no, I can see this. This makes sense.
Yeah, it takes the pressure off as well. Like if before going into it, I felt very guilty for not having read the books, but then after, because it was a nice event and people could speak, and you're really just like this, facilitating a conversation and giving them the platform to talk about their work, their lives, their focus areas. So yeah, I think it's a lot less pressure now going into panels if I ever host panels again. I would like to read the books, but I'm not going to kill myself if I don't.
Yeah. And like, not to keep talking about this because I don't want this to be the entire first segment. Is just talking about this panel you hosted, but too, like I think it was useful in your situation because it was about like queer representation in sci-fi was kind of like the vibe that you were going for, I think, and I think that you sort of not having all the context was useful because you were able to kind of keep it more on topic because you weren't like asking like because I feel like if you're a fan of somebody and they're on a panel you're hosting, you're more likely to like dig into specifics that you don't really that maybe the rest of the audience that aren't as familiar aren't as into. So I think that it was a good panel for that reason.
And if I'm a fan of someone, if I've read their work, I'm a fan of you, right? So, but if I meet the person after I've read the book, I get really I'm like nervous. So it also helps, so I don't go into weird nervous mode and like fan person mode. But yeah, we'll see how LavenderCon goes next year. Do you plan on going?
I'm I'm thinking about it. I don't have a new release until after. So part of
Yeah,
me is like, is it worth it? But part of me is like, it was so much fun and it was like great to connect with other queer
yeah.
authors. So it's like, should I do it for that reason alone? And it's like, I don't know if I
Yeah.
should. Like, is it worth the investment to do it? Because do you live in DC? I don't live in DC at all.
So I just moved from Geneva, Switzerland. So I was living in Switzerland for a while, and I've come back to the US. I'm in New Jersey now, but I'll move to New York City on Friday. So looking forward to that.
Yeah. So you
Um,
probably have a similar problem to me, which is like, if you don't have a thing to promote, do you want to pay to travel to DC to pay for the hotel to like, is it worth it? And it's like, I truly have, I will say I did sell out though. I did sell out of my stock when I went. So maybe it is worth it for that reason, if nothing else.
yeah, and you meet people, and I think if your old stock you can bring with you, even if you don't have a new one. I mean, you'll probably bump into people there who are curious about your first stuff. Maybe they haven't come across it yet. So yeah.
Yeah. So tell us how you got into writing, Michael. Like, have you been writing forever? Is this a new venture? Like, how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, so I think, I started writing. I've always enjoyed writing. I think this was something that I really enjoyed in high school and more like just academic essay writing. And I had a teacher in high school who kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Michael, she really liked one of these papers that I wrote." And she kind of gave me a pat on the back and said, "You're a really good writer. You should explore this." Right. So I went to college and I took a freshman year writing course with Joyce Carol Oates, who is a very prolific writer. And it was an amazing experience, but also like a gut wrenching experience because I had no idea what I was doing. And I think the first assignment that we had to hand in, it was like writing a scene. I don't even remember what the assignment was, but I just did it terribly. Like I didn't follow the assignment. It was not good. And then you're in that little writing circle and, she'll take your work and then she'll critique it and no holds barred. She will, butcher it if it needs to be butchered. And I think she actually asked, she was like, "Michael, do you have any idea what you're doing?" And I was so intimidated. I was so kind of like nervous about the whole experience. I didn't feel prepared. I had never done creative writing before, but I tried. I gave it my all each week after week. And there was one assignment that she read. It was more of a monologue based on a bit more of my lived experience, and I was really nervous about it. Like, really, this is something a bit more reflective of life. Is she going to butcher this too? And she read it and she took a look at it and she said, "Michael, now I know you can write." And from that point on, I kept going at it. I think after I graduated college, and I lived in many different places. I work in international humanitarian aid, so I lived in South Korea for a while, Latin America, West Africa, East Africa, and most recently Europe. And writing is one of those things that I've carried with me throughout all of those experiences. Whether it's been writing fiction, science fiction, fantasy, or creative nonfiction, it's just one of those things that for me is very wonderful and therapeutic, and something you can take with you anywhere you go.
Yeah, I love that. I kind of feel like that's such a fun origin story. First of all, for your first creative writing to have been with Joyce Carol Oates, like wild and sort of incredible. But then also probably like wildly horrified going into it to like feel so intimidating that you're like, what am I even doing here? I don't know.
I know it's like I don't know if you've ever watched HBO Girls, but I loved how Lena Dunham captured the creative writing seminar class style, and I felt exactly like that going into it because I had never done a creative writing course. I went to a public school system in New Jersey, and I walked in, and it really got the vibe that okay, these were kids who had gone to some of them had gone to really fancy private schools, some of them had been through creative writing programs before. Their assignments were really good. So I was really in awe of what I was hearing and being surrounded by, but I was so intimidated by it as well. So I think I was practically mute the whole semester because I was so frightened. And but I'm glad I stuck through it. I'm glad I didn't quit. I'm glad I didn't drop out. And there were people who had been through a course with Joyce Carol Oates, so I know who just stopped writing after that because they just shut down. They weren't used to receiving that degree of direct feedback and constructive criticism. And it can be hard to deal, especially if you've gone through life not receiving that I don't know if harsh is the right word, but so direct. But I think if we're open to that criticism, that's really how we learn, and we have to be open to that throughout our writing careers and writing journeys.
Well, and I think we both know as authors that is what being an author is being very open to criticism because you're going to get a lot of it as you go. And like for like trad pub, I think it's even worse because like you have to keep applying to agents and it's like a constant rejection is just like the name of the game. But then even as self pub, like reviews sometimes can feel very harsh. Even when they're positive, you can interpret them in your head as harsh, which I do more often than I should. And I think that it's just like part of it is like being able to, and also like I think if you have a good editor, you want them to be a little bit direct and harsh because you want to make your story as strong as possible,
Yeah, I had a friend who was querying a few years ago. I don't know if he still does this, but he would print out every rejection letter he got. He would tape it to the wall, and then he actually had darts. So he would, if he was feeling stressed or sad or depressed, I don't know, he would just chuck darts at all the rejection letters. Which I was like, that's really amazing. I don't know what the walls look like after all that dart chucking, but yeah, I thought it was a great idea in terms of maybe desensitizing yourself to it because there is rejection is a part and parcel of the work. And it is nice every once in a while when you get an agent or you get a publisher who reaches out and says, hey, it doesn't work for me, but gives a nice little piece of advice or maybe a little bit of a compliment that keeps you going, because it can wear you down. And I think you have to build up a bit of resilience, a bit of thick skin to let some of that deflect so it doesn't stop you or paralyze you.
Yeah, things I'd like to say when it comes to reviews is like, first of all, like your book is not for everybody. Like nobody's book is for everybody, right? So like part of doing this whole thing, putting your stuff out to the public is like trying to find the people that your book is for. And you got to wade through a lot of people who it's not for to find those people. And I think that sort of accepting that makes the bad reviews a little easier to take,
Yeah, and then the people who are fans, super fans, they're going to give you your 5 stars and say wonderful things about it, and then read whatever comes next and ask you for what's coming next, right? And I think that's the beauty of the diversity of the readership, that there is something out there for everyone. And then hopefully people who don't like it will just move on and be nice and leave you alone. And hopefully those who do like it will rave about it and really celebrate it.
So let's talk about whenever you made the jump to like actually like publishing your books. So what was that? When did that switch flip for you? Like whenever you were writing casually, then you're like, now I want to do this for real.
I think I started querying agents a long time ago. I don't know if that was 2011 or 2012. And I had other projects that I had worked before I wrote my first book, Deficient. So I think I'd written 6 or 7 manuscripts before then, and I was trying to query. And I learned from the process. I think the first book I tried to query was like 200,000 words, and it was obviously way too long. And then eventually one agent wrote to me and they were like, the idea is interesting, but it's way over page limit and you're just going to get rejections. So save yourself the time. And then I did another creative nonfiction piece that, like, the big thing that was coming back was needing to have platform. So eventually, when I got to Deficient, I said, okay, I'm gonna work on something that could be standalone, young adult, science fiction. I've learned a lot of these lessons. Let's go for it. And I think in 2013, I actually got an agent. So I had a literary agent who represented me. We worked on the manuscript. We pitched to traditional publishers. Sadly, it didn't go anywhere. And then that agent ended up leaving the agency. And then I think I got put with another agent at that agency, but that relationship didn't really go anywhere because she didn't represent my genre. So I ended up parting ways with that agency. And again, like, I was a little depressed because it takes so long to get an agent. You put your heart and soul into it. You tried your best, and then it didn't go anywhere. So I took a bit of a break. I was living in Sierra Leone at the time. Work was really intense. And I think it was after I left Sierra Leone and moved to Kenya in 2021, I had a bit more headspace where I could say, okay, I really like that old idea. I'm going to dig out that old manuscript and I'm going to collect all the feedback that I've received from the different publishers and different people who have read it, work on the craft, and then hone it up a little bit. And then I started pitching to small and medium-sized presses. And then I got a hit, I think, in 2021, and the book came out in 2023.
Wow, that's quite a journey. As I hate hearing these stories of getting an agent and then you just kind of like flounder for like years, because I feel like a lot of authors imagine once you get an agent, then you've made it. Then you're good. Like everything's going to be taken care of for you. And what I'm learning through this podcast, through people I talk to, is that's not at all true. Like there's oft like it's not unusual for you to get an agent and then like just kind of wait around for nothing to happen.
Yeah, and I think that I really enjoyed working with that agent, and she was a junior agent, so I saw her on one of those web pages where it's that moment when you have a younger person new to agenting who's building their portfolio. So I kind of fell into that and said, okay, this will be my strategy. Kind of go for the younger agents who are building their portfolios, and it was a great opportunity. The editing was fabulous. That experience was really interesting. But yeah, you pitched the book out and it didn't really go anywhere. And interestingly, from the different publishers, the feedback also wasn't consistent. So one publisher might have really liked the world building, another publisher might have not liked the world building. One publisher may have really resonated with the main character, another publisher may not have. So I also saw the subjectivity of some of the feedback. But what I was really trying to do was to try my best to see what threads were there from the feedback that I was getting to say, okay, I'm willing to work on the manuscript. I'm willing to strengthen it. I don't want to give up on this idea that I really like. And let's see where to go next. But I suppose I was a bit frustrated from that experience because it absorbed so much time. And I thought that, okay, if I want to really just get the book into the world, could I bypass the agenting process and then just target small or medium-sized publishers who would be interested in publishing this type of book and maybe use that as a start rather than doing the whole agenting process again? And it worked out. So that was good. And I'm not opposed to trying to my hand at the traditional, in the agenting path again in some way, shape, or form. But we'll come to that road when that happens, if that happens.
Yeah, it's a thing that I think about all the time. Like I have a book right now that I think is a cool idea that I think I'm gonna probably try querying. And part of me is like, but why do I want to do that? It's so funny because like I think that it's just there's something in us as authors that's like I just really want to get a traditionally published book, and it's like why do I care about that? But I do for some reason. Do you have any explanation for why we want that?
I got such a reality check because as part of my own tour, I had good friends who were living in Nepal and their kids were going to an international school there, and the school supported me in coming over and doing writing seminars with the kids. So it was a really awesome experience. And then after that experience, the school reached out, and one of the students reached out, a girl who was in her senior year, and she was a writer, and she wanted me to advise her on her senior project, which was around this idea of she had written a book, but she wanted to query it and get it out into the world. So I was giving her a little bit of advice along the way, reading the query letters and supporting her in that process. And she was just like, yeah, I'm going to make a list. I'll query 10 people. I'll see if they like it. If they don't, then I'll just publish it on myself. And she was just so clear-minded about what she wanted to do. She was like, I'll make my list of agents. If they don't want it, then fine. I'll just put it into the world myself. And I think it's that idea that we maybe it's a generational thing, but thinking outside of the box, being much more creative, being much more able to kind of take and shape and mold your own path with the tools that exist now. And I'm not sure when you started writing. I'd like to hear that, but maybe in, independent publishing was emerging, at a certain stage, and maybe it felt less. There was just more unknowns in that. So I think at that point, I still view it as something like, okay, why not try it and see if it goes somewhere? And if you got an agent and you got a contract with a traditional publisher, fantastic. But then there are so many other pathways out there. And I think it's worth investigating, researching. If you're going to go with a small, medium-sized press, there are also horror stories out there of predatory publishing practices that I think writers need to be aware of. And I think whatever your home is, you want to make sure that your work is in a safe home where it can be celebrated, where people can access it, and where you're proud and happy with where it's landed.
Yeah, I really love that, and I love that mentality that your friend had, because I think that that's maybe healthier than our sort of idea of like, I'll send it out to publishers, and agents, for infinity until somebody says it's good, or I will just stop with this book altogether and write something different because obviously this book isn't worth publishing or whatever. And like I've heard so many authors, like even like big authors say like their early books, they're like it was bad, it's good it didn't get published, and it's like I still love to read it. Like if you're an author that I
Yeah.
love, like I'd love to see that early book that you wrote, because if you thought it was good, like maybe it is now, like maybe just at the time, like the industry wasn't ready for it and all these other things.
And I think that's a thing. I know I fell into that as a younger writer. I felt that whatever I had created was ready to go, right? And I would start pitching it and querying it. And maybe, over a decade later, I can see, okay, that manuscript definitely was not ready to go. And then seeing what Deficient went through from the beginning to the end, yeah, like I would be almost afraid to read the very first version that came out. But I suppose what was powerful about that, even though maybe my craft wasn't quite there, was the spark of the idea, right? And I think we all
Yeah.
have those sparks that even in our younger years, that creativity is maybe raw. I don't know, it's a more raw creativity and it comes out differently. Some people might have the craft to mold it immediately into a way that traditional publishers or agents might like. And I think with Deficient, because I started drafting it in 2011, 2012, and it was through such a long journey until publication in 2023, it had the opportunity to go through many rounds and cycles of revision. I think what I was worried about, and I'm glad didn't happen, was you don't want to lose that spark, that raw
Yeah.
creativity that went into the original idea. You still want it to be authentic to that idea. Though I think there's something to be said about improving craft over time.
Yeah, and too, so two things. First of all, I think if you're an author and you have a manuscript and you felt like that manuscript wasn't good at the time for whatever reason, you can always go back and rework it. Like if the idea is good, you could still like rework that idea. Because the biggest lesson I had as a writer was the idea that like you can't edit nothing. Because like what was getting me stuck early on as a writer was like I would write a chapter, then I would like constantly write and rewrite the second chapter because I never knew where to go, and I wanted to keep like editing where the book was going. And it's like you just got to have a thing on a page, and then you can make
Yeah.
it something good after that. So I think that if you have a thing on a page, you could make it something after that, even if it was something from 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's Stephen King who does that approach where is it writing 5 pages a day or something, and then he, he doesn't read everything that he wrote before. He just reads the last page of what was written and then goes, right. And yeah, because I think you can get stuck, and I have gotten stuck too, if you get into that perfectionist mindset of it all has to be perfect as you go. You just get stalled, and same with me. I just don't move, right. So it's almost gushing the words out, getting them onto the page, even if it's messy. It's first drafts are supposed to be messy. And then at least it's like clay, like a blob of clay. And then you can kind of take it, you work with it, you mold it, you chip at it, you turn it into a statue over time. But that process for me always takes a lot longer than it does take a lot longer than the actual writing, I think.
Yeah, and I think that there's something too about like now that we're living in an age where self-publishing is far more common. I don't think there's anything wrong with a bad book getting published and then a better book gets published next and then a better book gets published next. You know what I mean? Like I think that there was this fear for a long time that like if I put a bad book out that my career is over and there's nothing ever happening again. And I think it's because there were so many gatekeepers that were responsible for how books got published. But I think that now that we're in this age where like you don't have to have that constant fear, like you can grow as an author, and it's okay to grow in public. Like, content creators do it all the time, right? Like, anybody that's like a TikToker or a YouTuber or whatever, like, if you look at their early videos, they're bad comparatively to their new stuff. But you can but we sort of watch that growth publicly, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, it's like season 1 of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer all the way to season 7. You see just how what a stark change and improvement it was over the course of that time, like with anything. And I think that's the exciting thing about being a reader and being a fan and supporting an author on that journey, to be part of it, really, and to celebrate those changes, to celebrate the maturity, to celebrate the growth, the same way we do with any artist or musicians, even as their growth and their artwork evolves. And sometimes, yeah, they might come out with an album or a record that is like, okay, I wish you'd go back to the original or go back to that style. But I think that's the beauty of art. People can create as they like and do what they want. And we're all along for the ride as well. And I think we also have the privilege to be able to also create our own works.
Well, I think that's how you grow too, is to try things you don't usually do, right? And then I think too, like, as a fan, I think it's kind of fun whenever somebody puts something out that's bad, or like whatever, like, is it as good as with their other stuff or whatever? But because then you get to see insights as to, like, but they're into this thing. Like, maybe this thing will show up later in this other thing that is good, and I can kind of like you can see traces of like who they are even in their works that aren't as good. Like, I think that's kind of fun as a fan to have those insights, you know.
Yeah. I like when authors do that as well, that they'll take an old manuscript and then put it up and then show the red markings and, the writing that wasn't great. And you see that, okay, this is a human too, right? They're not, this finished product isn't what defines them. It's actually, they've been through a really uphill battle to get the book to where it is and to get their work to where it is. But that's writing. It's not supposed to be a finished product the first time you put it on the paper. If it is, wow, like that's great. But I think for most of us, it takes quite a long time to get a final product.
Yeah. So I think that's good for our first bits. We'll take a quick break. Then whenever we get back, we'll have more with Michael Solís, and we're going to be talking about dystopian literature. Welcome back to Most Writers Are Fans. I'm once again joined by Michael Solís, and we're going to be talking about dystopian literature, but you had sort of a specific take you wanted us to take. So I'll let you sort of like take it from here. Like, what is the topic you were wanting to chat about today?
Yeah, so I was thinking that we are really living in an interesting moment in time, and I think a lot of people have been referring to it as a fascist moment, as a dystopian moment. We are in Trump 2.0 at the moment, and I think a lot of people are feeling a lot of frustration, a lot of fear, the tactics, the politics, the way things are working, and I think people are really feeling the effects of it. Whether there are people in immigrant communities who are being threatened by ICE or being threatened with deportation, whether it's people who are losing their temporary protection status, whether it's people who are losing their asylum pleas, whether it's people internationally who can't access medical supports and their own medication as a result to shutting down foreign aid, the freeing of the January 6th rioters, everything that's happening, we're kind of facing a barrage of what feels like an attack on freedom, an attack on democracy, an attack on communication. And it's a scary moment for a lot of people. And then invisibilizing communities as well, particularly the trans community at the moment, and really almost purposefully trying to delete people and delete this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's a really frightening moment now. And I think for me, I've also been directly affected by it in the sense of I was working in international humanitarian aid. The work has stopped. So I've had to leave my job, and I'm back in the US now. So it's perhaps not the most dire situation of all, but it's still feeling the impact of what political decisions can have. And I know there are a lot of people who are facing that, people who have lost their jobs, lost work, and they're facing different types of repercussions. And I think I'm interested in dystopian literature, and my own, my first book is also a dystopian young adult novel. And I love the idea of what you can explore in dystopian stories, because in dystopias, which are basically settings where there is injustice, there is violence, society is not good, something is going wrong, people are being othered and sidelined. The context sets up a scene for your protagonist where they have to somehow engage and interact with this setting, right? The setting is fundamentally flawed, and we find ourselves in the setting in a book, and the protagonist has to make a choice of whether they stay with the mainstream and status quo, or, as is the case in most of the stories, do they actually challenge the system in some way, shape, or form? And I think with dystopian works, because it tends to hover and veer towards darkness, you never really know the outcome, right? Will the protagonist be successful and be a hero and get exactly what they want? Actually, it's quite rare, right? And even if they do, I think the protagonist has been through such a crazy, chaotic journey. They're definitely not the same person at the end of the story that they were at the beginning of the story. And I suppose the parallel within our day-to-day lives is, as we find ourselves in this modern day dystopia, looking around us, we also as individuals have that choice. Are we the side characters? Are we part of the sheep, the herd that isn't doing anything, that isn't pushing against the system? Or are we taking risks, putting ourselves out there, trying to move and shake things, even when it feels like we can't, when we're powerless to do something? And I think that's really the beauty of some of the characters that are born in dystopian. They feel that same journey. They go through that same experience of perceived powerlessness. And sometimes they remain there, sometimes they stagnate, sometimes they degrade, and sometimes they overcome. But as I said before, sometimes the overcoming process is really wounding. So yeah, I think it's a moment. I'm curious to see if more dystopian works will be emerging from this political, this historic period. But I don't know. Are you a fan of dystopian?
Yeah, I mean, I love various different kinds. Like I was in college during Hunger Games, so like love that stuff. I read Brave New World with my students last year, and it was sort of a fun read to sort of like see the parallels happening in our culture. And I will say, as far as like this moment is concerned, and like the genre, I guess, of the world right now, like I've often thought of this as like we're living in the post-apocalypse because like a global pandemic is an often used apocalypse in many books and movies and things. So we're very much post that happening. Um, and I think that it's interesting framing to think about it that way, because like oftentimes those are a lot more like bleak. Whenever an apocalypse happened, the after is very bleak. And I think that we sort of had a bit of a reprieve, because I think that a lot of us felt very like um I don't want to say that we weren't engaged, but I think that we took a bit of a breath during the Biden
Mm-hmm.
administration, which I think maybe in hindsight was like us taking our eyes off the ball a little bit, but also like fair. It was fair of us to not be stressed 24/7, like we are now and like we were the previous 4 years. So like not to be too hard on society for that, but I think that that's something to think about. But I do think that I see a lot of parallels in like media literature. Like I watched Wicked when it came out, and the scene where Fierio sings "Dancing Through Life," I was like, "This is the problem. Is there so many people in our society that just sort of like doesn't want to get bothered by the stuff that's like makes life uncomfortable. Like I just want to like live life and have as much fun as I can, just kind of like move through it and sort of like ignore the bad things." And I think that people sort of, and then it goes back to things like Brave New World, because like they don't view it as a utopia, but it's not like bad. Like things aren't bad for them, because if you're not one of the like targeted classes or types of people that are targeted, life doesn't feel quite as bad, and you don't see the threats that like people like us see regularly. And I think that that's part of the real problem, is like we're not collectively seeing how bad things are.
Yeah, and I think with the link to Brave New World, like the characters numb themselves with soma, right? So they're
Yeah.
drugged half the time, they're they're having their orgy porgies or whatever, and it's a lot of fun, right? But you're right, they're switched off from the reality around them, and they're switched off from that individualistic thinking that is not reflected upon highly within the society. And I think it comes down to that within our own societies as well. And I think that is a problem of the dancing through life phenomenon that we fall into. And I think a lot of that is, whether it's hedonism or whether it's kind of numbness, what's numbing us.
Yeah.
And then I also think the problem is leadership, right? Because if I think back to when I was in college, George W. Bush was still in power, right? So we were in terrible wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, detrimental wars, so many lives lost, all under the basis of, particularly Iraq, for the search for weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, right? You fast forward to Trump right? And then we had the horrible response to the COVID pandemic and all the lives that were lost in that, and the detrimental response, really mishandled response to the COVID pandemic. And then in the Biden administration, I think we had really messy responses in Afghanistan, concluding that war, and then the awful genocide in Gaza, right? So, and I think there was a really strange moment, I think, when I was seeing two very different narratives of what was happening in Gaza, with a real fear to be able to call out and acknowledge exactly what we were seeing in terms of human rights abuses, crime against humanity, genocide, the fear of speaking out, the herd mentality, the mindset, pitting people against one another, and not recognizing what we're actually seeing on our phones and in videos, the violence playing out before us, children being killed, violence upon violence upon violence, and the failure of leadership to actually find a solution, to let that war, to let the genocide drag out. And then now we're back again, Trump 2.0. So I think there is that issue of leadership and kind of bad leadership, and it's often white male leadership. And now I think we're in the realm of white supremacist leadership again. So it's that, I think that's quite scary. And also realizing that these grown men often just don't even have any idea what they're doing. They're way in over their heads, right? And I think that's a scary thing to realize. When you're young, you almost assume that the adults in our lives know what they're doing and that we're in safe hands and that we're moving in a positive direction. But when you've seen successive administrations really failing on multiple counts, it is quite scary. And it makes me think of, like Coriolanus Snow in the Hunger Games and the different, Big Brother, who are behind the scenes, that they have fundamental flaws. They don't always know what they're doing, and they're veering us on the wrong path.
Yeah, interesting to talk about like the leadership, because I think that's obviously part of it, or like no denying that's part of it. Because first of all, as a teacher, I have become sort of aware and slightly terrified to the idea that there are so many kids that have grown up with Trump as president. But what I mean by that is not that they grew up in a time that was like chaotic or whatever, but like the truth is, in America, we often view the president as like the like role model that people follow, and like sort of sets the tone for what is okay and not okay in the country. And so the idea that they're seeing Trump like, and not to like get on a soapbox about like political correctness or whatever, but like just seeing a leader who like freely curses and also like regularly insults people and like attacks the media and things like openly, like I don't think that's great. That there are kids that are like, that's okay to do that. That's a thing that is okay to do. Because like for better or worse, probably worse, like he was sort of like the figurehead during that time. And then I think when you think about the Biden administration, again, for better or worse, most likely worse, he was very absent for much of his presidency. Like he was doing things very behind the sine, but then we didn't see a lot of him, which is part of like the world that we live in. Like it's kind of like upsetting that we want to see our leader that a lot. But I think that we do to some extent, because then whenever you think about once we switched him out for Kamala Harris in the election, there was a lot more mobilization, a lot more people sort of like aware of the things happening and like seeing change as possible, that were kind of like also in the background for 3.5 years. So like it is interesting that whenever there is a leader that is trying to mobilize people, that is like sort of like obvious, right? Because being the Democratic nominee is an obvious, like you're a leader now. It does sort of like motivate people in a direction that is sort of lacking. And that's the real problem now, is there's like no leadership on the left that is prominent enough to really like mobilize a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that was an interesting phenomenon during the Biden presidency, because there was almost a fear of putting him out there, right? Of what's he going to say now? Is he going to have another flop in public? Is it going to be like the debate? And I think the debate was the turning point, obviously, where the leadership was no longer seen as viable. And it is that challenge of, is the president, unfortunately, still is a role model out there, right? And you're right. 8 years of leadership for Trump, if he's in office that full time, will amount to young people having seen that model of leadership over the course of a significant period of time. And I was just reading, news the other day of a young 11-year-old girl who committed suicide because the students in the school were threatening to report her parents and family to ICE and threatening with deportation. And so she killed herself, right? And that's a failure that's our failure. That's society's failure. That's the school's failure. That's the system's failure. That's the politician's failure. That's one person who should still be around, should be living their life and growing up in a safe society, but we have failed. And I hope that young people can find outlets that are outside of this crazy political machine, and find outlets that feel safe, that feel comforting, and hopefully books being one of them, right? Resonating and relating to books, relating to characters who are going through similar experiences, which is why I feel like, all the work that's happened around diversity, equity, and inclusion and diversity within books has been so important, but it's also quite scary to see that being deleted. And even the international agencies that work in humanitarian aid removing references to diversity, equity, and inclusion from their websites, because if they have it on, then the government, the US won't fund their work, right? So it's a real censorship that's happening now as well. And really, I think we've taken a few steps forward, but now it feels like we're taking 10 or 20 steps back in some of these areas. And it just requires much more cognizant activist work, pushing forward, striving, whatever way we can do it. If you're a writer creating artwork, if you're an activist getting out there, supporting friends, supporting people who find themselves going through difficult times. And I think finding practical ways to bring our activism to light and to bring hopefully change to light over time. And I guess that's the one thing about even dystopian worlds, everything is subject to change, even the bad stuff, right? So there's that spark of hope in each dystopian story, no matter how dark it is. Maybe it's a character, maybe it's, hope at the bottom of the box in Pandora's box. Maybe it's a moment of change for the character. Maybe it's overcoming the enemy. But there is that hope that change is possible. And I think that's what we have to push forward.
Yeah, I think that the thing that this is just sort of like personally, the thing that I personally sort of like taken from like this second Trump term is I really want to make a real effort to lean more into like community and like ensure that like, specifically the queer people in my life and especially the trans people in my life feel supported and feel seen. And then also like lifting up the voices of people who are being silenced so that they can continue to like get their message out, because I think that that's so important now. And then I think maybe part of it is like take the pressure off of like trying to be the Katniss, because I think that that's part of your instinct, especially when you're like, because like we're authors, right? Like we're not like trying to change the world here necessarily. Maybe a little bit. We'd love it if it happened, but like we're not we're not actively doing it. But like we don't need to be the one like leading the charge. But I think that whenever you post to social media a lot, as you do when you're promoting books and things, like you feel like you have to make every post like something that really matters. And it's like maybe we don't need to put that pressure on ourselves, because usually like the hero figure sort of like emerges often unexpectedly, so unless you're that person, like unless you have a feeling in your heart that you're that person, maybe take that pressure off yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and I think back, like even to that high school teacher who I had, who pulled me aside, and it was at a time when I was queer. I was, it was not a safe space, the school or the town. It was scary, and I didn't have much confidence. But a small heroic act of just pulling someone aside and saying, "Hey, I really like that essay," or "Hey, I think you've got something. Keep going." It doesn't have to be Katniss Everdeen like rocking the bow and arrow and shooting everything around her, right?
Yeah.
But maybe like those small acts of, so how do we bring that into our lives? So for my brother and his kids, my niece and my nephews, what messages do I send to them? How can I be present for them in their lives as they get older and are grappling with this reality? And maybe in our work or our writing, we can be, a Katniss Everdeen in our own way, right? But I agree with you. Like we're not all that that kind of alpha protagonist, maybe persona in our day-to-day lives. It's how to put it into practical means, I suppose. But anyway, if I could shoot, bows and arrows like Katniss Everdeen, I really would be happy. I would. Maybe I should learn, take lessons. I don't know.
Well, I think that in the age of social media, and like I said, especially when you're people like us who do post a lot, because like we have to, right? Like we have to post a lot. That's part of our job, is posting a lot about the things that we do. I think that there's this weird instinct to be like, I have to be the one that saves everybody. And it's like, no, you don't. What are you talking about? And I think that maybe like realizing that is like good and useful. Like, but I think you're right. Like in your day-to-day life, and for the record, very inspiring to me as a high school English teacher. Because like I often think about, like, even if I don't say anything especially profound in school, just being somebody who lives my life openly in a high school and kids can see that, I think it's probably really powerful to kids who don't have that in their lives otherwise. So like, I really love and appreciate the opportunity to be that for a lot of kids, like just sort of being an example of like what life could be, just without trying to live constrained,
Yeah. And I had, I mean, what I've loved a lot about sharing this book with the world has been, the openness of people who have reached out and said, "Hey, Michael, come to the school, like have a chat with our kids. We'd love to have you." And that has been the most enriching opportunity to be able to engage directly with people who are more or less of the age that, I would have liked to have shared the book with. Right. And there was one where, a lovely, lovely friend invited me to her school. She's a teacher, and presented on the book, did workshops with kids on creative writing. All of the classes were great. And then the very, very last class, we did an exercise with young kids in, I think, 6th grade. And one of the exercises was around goal, motivation, and conflict when you're creating characters. And so the assignment was to create your own character, create a science fiction character who goes to this, fictional school that I created in my book. And what is their superpower? What are their personalities like? And one kid actually did the assignment, but the only thing he wrote on it was the character's gay, right? And I didn't know how to respond to it because I was walking around looking at the, what the kids were creating, and he just wrote that on the paper. And I was like, okay, if that's, you might want to build a little bit more about the character beyond, just that characteristic. That's really important. And maybe is he struggling with that? Is there something, to explore that a little bit deeper? But it was quite clear that the child was using it as a way to try to elicit laughs from the kids around him. And actually, to the credit of the kids, they weren't entertaining it. They weren't laughing. They didn't think it was funny. And then the teacher just did, she was just magical. She, pulled the student aside, had a chat about it. And I think the message she ended up sharing was, some of these things that you do have forever consequences. The things that you say, the way that you communicate, the way, if we belittle other people, that has an impact on people for the rest of their lives. And it was really strange for me being back in kind of the school system and feeling that again, but much older, and seeing that take shape. And we have this idea that we've advanced so much, that we've made so much progress, that discrimination, the discrimination that maybe we experienced when we were in school has somehow lessened. But I don't think that's the case. I just think it takes different forms, and we have to be really proactive to it rather than being reactive. But yeah, it was just, for me, that was a learning moment. And I think, yeah, kids are going through a difficult time now. It's never easy growing up and coming of age. So whatever tools and resources and supports that we have or can provide, I think are really helpful.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's good advice too, is just like, we are being useful to other people by just being honestly ourselves. Whenever you are like a queer person, whenever you're a person of color, whatever, we don't have to necessarily be activists all the time. We can just be ourselves, and that is inspiring to people sometimes, just because. And it's not even that you have to be a big deal about it. Like, just if someone happens to come across your stuff, like, just seeing more of it, because maybe like me posting a video, you posting a video isn't going to change somebody's life. But if they scroll through both of our videos, and then 5 other videos of queer people, and they're a queer person, like, that's going to feel like community to them they are missing right now. So I think that's maybe something to keep in mind, is that sometimes just being yourself is like worth it, and like okay to and like an okay way to sort of respond in this moment. So Michael, if people want to learn more about you, where should they go to do that?
Yeah, so I have a website, michaelsolisauthor.com. I'm also on Instagram at michaelsolisauthor, TikTok at michaelsolisauthor, and I have a blog on my website and everything like that. So I think, yeah, I'm probably most active on Instagram and TikTok these days. And we were talking about things that we do. So I also teach yoga, and I love meditation. So once a week, I'm starting to do these kind of mindful Monday meditations that are kind of for writers, for artists, for creatives, people who are creating content in the book world. So I post those on Mondays if people just need time to chill out and maybe connect to themselves and find a little bit of peace and clear the brain, clear the mind before the week. And then we can get into our writing, we can get into our activism, we can get into whatever that we're doing. But it was just one thing that I thought, okay, maybe I'll try to give back because it's had an impact on my life, and maybe it might help others. If not, who knows? But anyway, that's the beauty of social media. You can do whatever you want and see what works.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much for stopping by, Michael. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, Terry, a pleasure. Keep up the fantastic work.